Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the House Committee on Innovation, Internet and Technology. It's Monday, May 10th. I'm Representative Deb Ruggiero, chair of the committee, along with my esteemed colleagues. Today, our topic is how safe are our municipal agencies, our municipalities, and schools from any cyber attack. Clerk, would you please take the roll so we have a quorum?
Sure.
Thank you.
Chair Ruggiero,
Here.
Representative Handy, Representative Carson, Representative Amore, Representative Chippendale,
Present.
Representative Courtfriend, Representative Craven, Representative Patrick Kennedy,
Representative Kennedy here.
yes. Representative Charlene Lima, Representative Messier,
Still you.
Representative Morales,
Here.
Representative Place,
Present.
Representative Shanley,
Here.
Representative Tansey,
Present.
and Representative Tabone. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Clerk, and thank you, everyone. You know, this is such a timely topic in light of what just happened this past weekend with the Colonial Pipeline, a major pipeline that was serving 45% of the fuel on the East Coast, shutting down because of ransomware. Those bad actors typically seize the data, and demand large amounts of payments. Just last month, faculty and staff at Brown University had to shut down their computers. They were running Microsoft Windows in response to that cybersecurity threat. And even in the last couple of years, at least 8 Rhode Island municipalities that we know of, including East Greenwich, Newport, Exeter, have experienced fallen victim to some kind of a ransomware attack. The Coventry School Department paid about $200,000 in ransomware so they could get their files back, so they paid that to their insurance company. So needless to say, local government is a very lucrative target for ransomware. And last year, Rhode Island saw about 20% increase in security attacks in our schools and municipalities. So the panel I'm about to introduce to you today for our conversation is part of the state's cybersecurity task force. They meet pretty regularly. I've been talking with them in an ongoing way, and I just thought it was really important for this committee to hear the work that they're doing and for the public to understand the state's top cybersecurity threats. How are our towns and schools mitigating those risks, and what are the best practices for a 21st century economy where we do so much online? So if I may, I'll introduce you to Lieutenant Eric Yelle from the Rhode Island State Police. He's been with the Computer Crime Unit for 10 years now. He heads up the Joint Cyber Task Force. Scott Gosling, why don't you wave so we know there's Scott. He's the Director of Technology for the Rhode Island Department of Education, RIDE. Brian Tardif, many of us have seen him before. He's Chief Security Officer and Cybersecurity Specialist, formerly with the Rhode Island National Guard, and now he's with the Rhode Island Department of Technology. Dave Marble is also joining us. He's with Ocean State Higher Education Economic Development Network, overseeing the technology for all of our meds and eds, the universities, the hospitals, as well as the colleges and the libraries. So we'll start with Lieutenant Eric Yelle. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us today. And I thought we would just get a little overview from each of you and then, ask some questions. I know I have a number of questions about our cybersecurity mitigation, what our risks are, and what we're doing. Lieutenant Yelle, I know you head the cyber task force. What do municipalities need to do in the event of a cyber attack? And what's the first phone call? Is it to the state police or is it to their insurance company? Oh. You're on mute, Lieutenant. Thank you.
Cyber 101. Stay on mute as long as you can. Thank you, Chairwoman, for hosting this evening. I think it's a very important and timely discussion regarding cybersecurity. It's a never-increasing problem in society, and it's really not a matter of if, but when. And we need to make sure that that our networks are secure and that we can restore them if we become vulnerable to a cyber incident. Regards to your question, Specifically, you said, what's the first phone call, if I recall correctly? And that first phone call should be to law enforcement, but the interlocal trust insures most municipalities in the state of Rhode Island. And as a result, their first call is to their insurance company, which is the interlocal trust. And as they, part of their procedure and their policy in order to get compensated is to contact the interlocal trust, who then contacts a private insurer, typically Beasley Insurance, which is out of state, and they contact a local firm to send a computer assert team or response team to mitigate the situation. If they deviate from that, if they contact law enforcement first, or if they sit on that without contacting the interlocal trust immediately, they jeopardize being compensated for their losses. So that's the first call, unfortunately. And oftentimes the trust will, not the trust, but Beasley Insurance and their partners will negotiate the ransom to pay down the ransom to get the files back and restore their network.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Lieutenant Yelle? We'll probably have some as the conversation continues. Brian, thank you for joining us again. I know you've been before this committee before, and you specialize in cybersecurity and have done so for many years with the National Guard and now for the state of Rhode Island. If we could hear from you, Brian, Tardif, what keeps you up at night, and what's your role in better helping our municipalities and our schools?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for inviting this group to meet with you today. So, from my perspective, the challenge really lies with our lack of awareness of what's occurring at the municipality level. Speaking to Lieutenant Yelle's point, a lot of times, it's a coalition of the willing that's tackling this challenge across the state, which is mostly comprised of the Joint Cyber Task Force, as you've been briefed on. What we find as we engage with the municipalities is the maturity level of their cybersecurity hygiene level is not quite where it should be. There's an absence of framework, and without a defined framework, a cybersecurity framework, it's nearly impossible to assess yourself and identify gaps in your cybersecurity posture to increase that maturity level. So I think, what really keeps me up at night is lack of awareness, considering the state of how small the state is and how interconnected all our information systems are. So municipalities often have state applications residing on their systems that belong to the state government, that connect to state systems. So if those are compromised at the municipality level, the opportunity exists for lateral movement to the state networks. So we keep, this group coordinates frequently. We have an internal incident response process, whereas if the state is informed of an incident, or the state police are informed of an incident, or even Ocean is informed of an incident under their jurisdiction or Overwatch, we share that information across with each other to ensure that the appropriate responses are applied.
So, Brian, what should some cities and towns be doing that perhaps they're not doing?
I think number one is leadership buy-in and understanding of this cybersecurity challenge. I think once there's an understanding that this is a problem, and as Lieutenant Yelle highlighted, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when an incident will occur. Once you own the problem, then you can start addressing it through the defining of a cybersecurity framework, and then start building out your posture based off of the threats specific to state and local governments, which, as we know, as you stated, Chairwoman, highlighted in the news quite often is ransomware. That is still a primary threat. But cyber risk is not just about ransomware. There's a number of ways that your systems and your operations can be interrupted based off of cyber activities.
Mm-hmm. Should there be a standard for all cities and towns without imposing any kind of an unfunded mandate, kind of a best practice? Do other states have that? Is that something that Rhode Island should look at, Brian?
That is absolutely something that, that we look to communicate from the Joint Cyber Task Force. The state, we leverage the NIST cybersecurity framework and the 853 series of security controls. All of our policies, our defense in depth program is built around that framework, and it would be much simpler if the municipalities adopted the same. It makes incident response easier, it makes triage of incidents easier, and it makes the shared collaboration that the Joint Cyber Task Force endeavors upon easier across the municipalities and schools.
Interesting. Does anyone have any other questions for Mr. Tardiff? Also joining us is, just looking at the screen, Scott Gosling from the Rhode Island Department of Education, and that's really important because it's not just municipalities, it's also our school districts, you know, laptops and computers there. Is there a standard, Mr. Gosling, for all school districts in mitigating these cyber attacks, and how do we alert people about those phishing emails so they don't click on those links?
Unfortunately, there is not a standard. As you know, Rhode Island is a very strong and local control of school systems, so there is not any one standard at the moment, and that's something that we're looking to address here today.
Is there a way to standardize? I know Mr. Tardiff talked about NIST, which I just learned about NIST myself, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Is there a way to institute something like that across the 36 school districts and 39 cities and towns without an unfunded mandate? Is it something that is just accessible?
Well, I think the key there is unfunded. So I think if we begin communicating to the various school districts on the importance of this program, then I think first and foremost we can get their buy-in as to why this is a very important topic and why they should dedicate resources to it.
Mm-hmm. And I know Dave Marble is also joining us from the Ocean State Higher Education Economic Development Network. Ocean. Dave, I don't know if a lot of people understand what Ocean and what you do. Do you mind taking a few minutes to explain that and your connection with this technology and these potential cyber attacks?
Sure. Ocean provides both a broadband fiber infrastructure and then services, cybersecurity services, cloud services, and internet services to about 160 anchor institutions in the state, all the universities, all the hospitals, a lot of the government agencies, and a lot of the K-12s and libraries throughout the state. So we kind of have a more, a holistic overview of this, the posture of cybersecurity throughout the state and internet usage throughout the state. And so having them all interconnected, one of the things that I'm a long time born and bred Rhode Islander, and I'm always looking to see if we could actually use the power of the size of our state to do something more holistic. Scott mentioned about having sort of not a uniform way, throughout the state to implement some of the things that we should be doing. And you've mentioned upcoming, essentially unfunded mandates. We will have some opportunities going forward to have them be funded mandates. Things that we could do for the entire statewide population in this area. In the past, the schools, for example, have not included at the federal level funding for the security side of their internet services, but that is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And so we need to have a more, let's say, holistic view towards being able to do this for all the schools and municipalities who are, by definition, joined at the hip in their local districts, right? Mm-hmm.
So what would you recommend? What should school districts be doing that we're not doing?
Well, I think, it was mentioned by all three of our panelists, is that the leadership awareness of how important this is needs to have a sort of a uniform come together and say, we've got to take this to another level. And Those of us who are in the business of running these networks, and we can see it every single day. Our schools and our municipalities and our universities are being attacked every day. And Brian mentioned the various natures of the different types of attacks. And there are technologies that we have a lot of talent that we can put together in a group to uniformly address a number of these issues as funding becomes available. And I think the time is now to actually address some of these things holistically.
Representative Courtfran? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Can I ask the last gentleman speaking, can you please say how you, or any of the panelists, how you would go about developing a program, a statewide program that our school departments and municipalities could, I don't know if enroll is the right word, what organizations could help assist you in that? I was thinking of the League of Cities and Towns. Do they have any sort of a cybersecurity person or agenda item? Have they identified it as a priority? Or maybe the School Business Leaders Association or Superintendents Association? Could you speak to that?
Good question.
So who's supposed to go?
Whoever wants to speak, all of you.
Well, I wholeheartedly think your suggestion of the League of Cities and Towns. I do believe that there are groups that could take leadership roles at the school level, as a superintendent's group. I'm a huge fan of going to the top first, the superintendent's group and the League of Cities and Towns at the highest level, so that we can then filter down, and there will be, let's say, an imprimatur from those groups to do the kinds of things that we think might need to be done. I think that could be extremely helpful. Ultimately, this becomes a cultural change that goes all the way down to creating digital citizens all the way at the school age level, and how to avoid things like phishing scams and all of that in their daily, call it digital lives.
If I may, we have the Joint Cyber Task Force. I believe Brian was there and the National Guard was there. We have spoken with the Leagues of City and Towns, the Association of School Committee, and a couple other entities regarding cybersecurity and kind of bolstering the posture. That was about a year and a half ago, pre-COVID. So we have reached out to them. With the interlocal trusts, we did a thing for the IT departments, administrators of local cities and towns, to try to get their buy-in, get the buy-in from the IT department, get the buy-in from the school department, from the school committee. So we've had a layer approach in the past, as that was starting to pick up some speed maybe and some impetus. COVID kind of interfered, so we should circle back around and go down that path again.
Absolutely. There is a national gold standard, though, a framework for improving infrastructure. I mean, we talked about NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Should this be in every school and municipality's first line of defense, at least having some kind of a template or a checklist? And is it being used in all 39 cities and towns and 36 school districts? Does anyone know? Maybe, Mr. Gosling or Mr. Tardif? If you could speak to that.
Well, the group here is looking to formulate a plan that school districts can take advantage of, right? So we're working with one municipality and one school district to come up with a plan that we can then expand out and roll out to the broader community.
Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
If I may, so you're aware of those activities, Chairwoman, and the goal of that working group is, to Scott's point, build a repeatable model that can be adopted across municipalities and school districts. There's also the work that's being done by the Secretary of State's office in regards to election security, ensuring that municipalities adhere to some basic security guidelines that align with the NIST cybersecurity framework and the family of controls there. So I think there's an opportunity once we define a program for the schools through this working group to kind of have a cross section of the Secretary of State's work and this working group's work to establish the NIST framework across the municipalities and school systems. Again, I go back to my previous comment of, we need to be mindful that these systems are all interconnected as well as connected to the state systems. So if we can achieve that goal of one established framework across all entities, I think we'd be making great progress.
Thank you. And we'll talk about that pilot program in a moment. I see Rep Chippendale has his hand up, so could we please go to the rep for your question? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me well. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your input. Certainly, this is perfect timing with, as it was said, with what we just saw with the Colonial Pipeline, which interestingly wasn't your standard ransomware where it was threatening to share data. They actually took over the operations of the entire pipeline, which is certainly some next level stuff insofar as these types of cyber attacks go. But again, going back to the context of our schools and municipalities and really any organization, frankly, that has access to the internet and email, because that's how these things propagate, is through someone unwittingly clicking something thinking it's official or it's curious to them and they click it, and unbeknownst to them, they've infected their entire network with a virus that'll just keep worming its way through until they're able to hold everyone hostage. So we have a human behavioral issue and a technology issue, really. It's hard. We'll never get everyone to stop clicking curious emails or accidentally clicking those things. But when we think of what happened with Colonial, and then we come back to what we're talking about now, in my mind, it makes me sort of reflect back to viruses when we were dealing with them in the 90s, where there was no internet that was so widely used by everyone. It was mostly local networks within a building, and someone brought in a floppy disk that had a virus on it, and your McAfee would try to clean it off, and then a new virus would come out. So it seems like we're always chasing our tail. And then the internet came in, and that just allowed the proliferation of these worms and these Trojan horses and every sort of modality that these computer geniuses with evil intent choose to create and send our way. So with that experience we're watching unfold, because I guess Colonial was unsuccessful today trying to re-seize control of their system. So I suspect this will be ongoing for a while. With that happening, again, in context of this conversation with municipalities, is it even possible, in your expert opinions, because you guys are the experts in this area, that we would be able to anticipate that eventual evolution up to an operational level, although we're just talking about our municipalities right now and the data that's being held hostage? Because I suspect, again, our municipalities will also continue to evolve technologically, and operational control of certain aspects will then become part of their systems. So are we even in a spot to be able to sort of forward think about that?
Thank you, Rep. Gentlemen?
I can tackle this one initially, Dave, if you'd like. Okay. So great question, Rep, and much appreciated. This is part of the ongoing discussion. We eventually want to get to a maturity level where we have a proactive cybersecurity posture. We're not being responsive to particular threats or attacks, such as what's occurring with the pipeline. And establishing that framework initially out of the gate helps to build that cybersecurity defense in depth program where policies will shape user behavior, but then technology is implemented to ensure that these types of events can occur. What's important to note is while phishing may occur, and you're right, that is probably 95% of malware that's introduced into information systems is via phishing attacks. That's because the bad guys understand that users are the soft targets. An untrained user workforce is by far the weakest link, so to speak, in cybersecurity. But what's also important to note is even though phishing may come through and someone may click on the link, if a vulnerability management program is in place, that particular malware can't exploit that system. And that would be something that would be defined within the established framework. So it's not just about the people, it's about the process and the technology that would be put in place or could be put in place that would prevent these types of attacks from occurring.
Anyone else?
Thank you very much.
I always use sports analogies, right? We're always on defense and they're always on offense, right? And you know, you come up with new schemas over time. In digital transformation, which we are all going through, whether we like it or not, in digital transformation, the cybersecurity aspect is going through a massive revolution over time in terms of the technology used. It will ultimately be AI systems fighting against AI systems. That is the nature of the way it goes. But as you are in the game, you have to adapt over time to the technologies and, quite honestly, the money that you have to fight as best you can. And that's kind of where we're saying this needs to be programmatic, you know, continuous, and we will apply the best techniques that we know over time based on the budgets that are assigned and what we can do with that budget. But there is a lot we can do right now, a lot, to mitigate some of the things that we do, that we see.
And are we doing that?
Not to the level that we could be.
And why not?
And I get, again, I see it because so for example, we have the Naval War College on our network, right? The amount of time, effort, and money that they put into their defense is, and are executing in an unbelievably strong and good way, right? Pales in, you know, a municipality pales in comparison to what's being done there. And there's gradations between let's say the municipality and the Naval War College and what can be done. And I think we have a lot of talent in this state to be able to apply to pick the right things to do at what period of time under what dollars we have available to us.
But with all due respect,
and we
Mr.
can-
Marble, municipalities don't have the financial wherewithal that a Naval War College does, but yet they still have to.
But that's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I'm saying. I said that there are lots of gradations in between. You're not going to do what the Naval War College is done, but know that there are techniques along the way to actually, you know, not be at that level, but to do a lot of really great work.
Thank you.
You know, to get there.
Representative Place has a question. Thank you.
I had a question, but I also now have a comment. I mean, we don't need to be at the naval warfare. I mean, the town of Burrillville doesn't need to be at the level of the Naval Warfare College because the importance of the data which they're protecting in the overall scheme of things is, you know, definitely lower at Burrillville than it is the Naval Warfare College. So I guess my question is there a basic standard? I mean, you talked about how, someone talked about how once that person hits that phishing button and it's imported into their system somehow, there should be another additional backstop. Is that a software fix to an individual computer, or is that a software fix to an overall system? So is this something that as municipalities and school districts upgrade their technology on, you know, was every 3 to 5 years at this point, not even, I mean, if you're going to do it right, it's probably every 2 years, but realistically every 3 to 5 years, is this something that we can come up with a standard that they can implement into their normal capital expenditures in updating their systems just in the way they naturally do it now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
I can field that question if you'd like.
Thank you.
So that would be platform dependent. So it depends on what you have for an email solution. I'll go back to Dave's point though. You know, everybody's in the process of modernizing their IT systems, and that includes the service providers. So as the platforms mature, I'll speak to Microsoft 365, for instance. They have a fantastic suite of organic security tools that help prevent against phishing and malware through email systems. But it would be, again, dependent on the platform and the level of investment of that platform and the rate of modernization. We certainly can't allow for IT systems to become stale for 5 to 10 years, because that's probably 3 years, or if you wait 5 years, you're 3 years behind the security power curve. It's really becoming a proactive game where you have to stay ahead of what the bad actors are attempting to accomplish.
And Brian, I would add that it's no one platform, it's the culmination of the entire ecosystem that needs to be protected. So it takes dedicated resources to monitor all the various devices that are on the network and to make sure that they're all patched and current. And I would also add too, with regards to older technology, I know it's taken me about 6 or 7 years to convince leadership to upgrade critical software applications and to get that funding to be able to do those upgrades. So those are the type of things that we need to talk about as well, making sure that when a vulnerability is identified, that folks have the ability to actually upgrade it or mitigate it in some way, shape, or fashion that requires funding.
And those kinds of upgrades are one-time only funding, much like the federal funding that we're seeing, that could upgrade a lot of the old, perhaps legacy systems, because what I heard you say earlier is a lot of cities and towns, they're silos. They each have their own internet system, and it's not like one big statewide regulation, where they all must follow certain standards, correct? Everyone's doing their own thing?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Did you have a follow-up, Rep. Place? Excuse me, yes.
Do we know if the interlocal trust has begun to offer discounts for municipalities to upgrade their systems based on the prevalence of these kind of attacks? I mean, we just named off of, I think the chairwoman named off at least 3, I'm guessing within the last 12 to 24 months.
Right, there have been 8 ransomwares in the state.
So I'm guessing there has to be, from the insurance company's perspective, a financial, that they have to have a motivation to incentivize these municipalities to do it as well, to offer some sort of discount on their premiums. Do we know if the trust has begun to look at something like that as well?
I could speak briefly on that. I know in the past they have, the cyber insurance is an add-on, so it was just an add-on, and they included it in all municipalities as part of their insurance. And if they don't contact the interlocal trust, then they're not going to get compensated for any losses, and they're not going to get the compensation for any services that were exhausted trying to mitigate the situation. Talking to them about a year ago when we were getting a lot of ransomware attacks, talking to people at the trust, they were trying to do the carrot not the stick approach at this time. So they didn't want to penalize people or cancel insurance, but they weren't going to pay for the incident response or the CERT teams that responded out there to mitigate the situation. That was their approach at the time. You can follow up and see what their approach is now. I haven't talked to Dave in a little while.
It's a great question.
The insurance market itself is maturing, and originally you could get the insurance without even doing a compliance study on what the risk was up front, and that has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. So now your rates are much more aligned with whether or not you have a good program to start with. And so the market is also maturing dramatically on the insurance side.
Well, that's good to hear too, Dave, because, obviously you want compliance, and if the rates, there is statewide compliance based on insurance rates. We have two other questions. We'll go to Rep. Tansey, and then Rep. Tabone is standing by. I want to make sure I see my colleagues who are on the screen joining us from WebEx. So, Rep. Tansey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm wondering if there is a model state out there that is doing, a wonderful job at this, and if that is the case, is there a per capita amount of spending that each state should be doing? We seem to break everything down per capita so that we can understand if our state is allocating enough and investing enough money into this. So I'm just looking for a way for us to measure ourselves against other states and make sure that we're allocating enough money. I'm guessing we're not.
So I can just speak from the CISO perspective. Nationwide, these are discussions that are ongoing with the CISO community. A majority of us are in the same boat that I'm in. We're responsible for executive branch, and we understand the challenges of cybersecurity in municipalities. And right now, I don't know that there is a model state that we could look at and say, this is how the framework should be established, and this is how it should be monitored and whatnot. So it is part of ongoing discussions nationwide that I will continue to update this group with.
Thank you.
I will say, we have a national organization that looks at this. I will say this does not answer your question on what a model state is, because, like Brian said, it's an ongoing discussion that everybody is having at the municipality and school level. But one of the things that's a disturbing trend is that municipalities are relying way too much on the insurance side of the business. And so there are statistics out there that say the municipalities keep on upping their insurance levels in lieu of actually doing the prevention. Mm-hmm. And that's becoming known to the criminals. And so because the criminals now know that the amount that they will actually get paid out on has gone up, right? And so it's a self-defeating prophecy, but that's an anecdote that says that nationwide we're still having issues at this level, at the municipality level.
And that's an important point that you make, Mr. Marble, because when I heard that, I said, this is something this committee should hear. Our municipalities are upping their insurance rates, knowing that there might be a cyber attack, but we're not honestly looking at some kind of a statewide compliance program where a certain amount of things have to be done with the municipality or with the school district to ensure that these kinds of bad actors don't start attacking a lot of these systems. We have two more questions from reps, and I want to honor that. So we have Representative Carlos Tabone, and then we'll go back to Rep. Chippendale. Rep. Tabone, are you there? You're muted. If you unmute, you'll be able to ask a question. Otherwise, we'll go to Rep. Chippendale, and then we'll come back to you. He also told me, he texted me that he was on a train. So why don't we go to Rep. Chippendale if you have another question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think that the guests that have testified today have really shed some fantastic light on the exact issue and problems associated with it. Rep. Tansey also touched on something that I wanted to sort of direct more to the legislators on this panel, which is that we've already discussed the fact that the individual towns use different platforms, sometimes different operating systems, certainly different databases. We have some towns that operate that do their operations on like SAP systems, and others like mine that use spreadsheets. They're all over the place, and it is usually driven by the economics of the municipality. Towns, again, like Foster and Gloucester, we have smaller budgets, we have fewer people, and we spend less money. So while it's unfortunately easier to buy more life insurance than it is to start eating healthy, right, for towns, which is what they're doing with the interlocal trust, it's also, I think, important for us as legislators to recognize that we have, and this pandemic notwithstanding and the things that we've done. But we have, as policymakers, really thrust upon our towns a lot of responsibilities that can only be met through the use of these very complicated computer systems that are accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I mean, that's natural. It helps them do their jobs easier because technology is great. But, you know, and we used to joke about the guys at Norton and McAfee who would write the virus protection software would then, you know, moonlight writing the viruses for the next wave. And I think everybody in IT joked about that at one point. But that's the reality of it.
Right.
So we have to, when we're putting these mandates on our towns, also consider the fact that they're being forced to spend money on something that really brings them nothing in return but peace of mind, right? It's like insurance. I will never see the benefit of my life insurance by its own nature. Same thing with towns. They're not going to see that benefit. So I think, while we craft policies that will further expose them to these potential pitfalls, must include a financial element. And I know that that's very simple to say, and it's always difficult to do in practice when we're doing this. But I think as a state and our individual 39 municipalities and all their subdivisions, it's incumbent upon us to ensure that they have all of those resources.
Excellent point, Whip.
My plea.
Yep, that's a great point. As I started by saying, we don't want unfunded mandates. But at the same time, what we're hearing is there isn't statewide compliance, and every city and town seems to have their own platform. An excellent point that there's not an immediate payback. I want to get back to a point that I think Rep. Cortrian made when she was asking the question about our superintendents involved with school committees. What is the template, if you will, of what we can do in one community and then maybe kind of tease it out throughout the rest of the state? And I know Mr. Tardiff mentioned it briefly, and I will share with you someone who's joining us. Keith Roberts is a chief tech officer for a company in Warwick. He's also our school committee chair, who came to me with a number of questions about what is our cybersecurity. I'm really concerned about kids with laptops. So I put him in touch with this group, with Dave Marble, with Brian Tardiff, and he is part of a pilot program. So Keith, are you on the line now so you could maybe share some of what is happening with the school district with hopes, and I know you're using NIST, we talked about that we could perhaps put it out there to other school districts to follow suit, if I understand the project correctly.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Roberts. As Deb mentioned, we kind of started putting together a group a couple months ago. I don't remember which of the group coined the phrase, but it's somewhat of a coalition of the willing. As you know, I kind of came into this group. I emailed Brian and got with Dave a couple of months ago because I was trying to understand what was available. You know, I think much like I've heard a little bit of already today, but what I've heard a lot of over the past couple of months is what are the requirements and what's available to satisfy those requirements. What I learned in short was that there wasn't really much that is out there being followed by any municipality in the state of Rhode Island. That some had struggled with some of the issues that were already highlighted here, but there really is no template of a program that anyone could follow. So the group had kind of put together something. Other gentleman that Brian had introduced us to from another agency has been working with our tech director in Jamestown to get through some of the initial assessments, but also some of the remediation efforts that can also be deployed. And I think through that exercise, really trying to establish a bit of a pilot program that other school districts could follow. Dave and I think Mike have joined some of the monthly or bi-weekly tech director meetings that our tech director is part of to introduce some of this into that, into those folks so they're aware of the work that's happening. But the reality is that not every district is like Jamestown in the sense that we're very small, and so we've got a little bit more flexibility with what we do with the resources. Not a ton, but we certainly have a little bit more. And so I think what we need to figure out is how to get the municipalities to come on to this pilot program. And I've spoken to the folks in Jamestown about doing so, and hopefully can get some others to kind of lean into this work so that we can define a program and we can figure out how to make these resources more accessible and usable by a broader number of communities.
Thank you, Keith. And so hopefully in time, I mean, this is brand new, there will be some kind of a pilot program through this, correct? That's the intention, and I think that's what Brian Tardiff was talking about before. Good. Any other thoughts about the pilot program that maybe, Jamestown is so small, and it happened because you came to me with so many questions, put you in touch with these folks here, but some districts may not have IT people, right? So if that's the case, what do we do in school districts? So this is a larger issue in many ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I've started to push up onto the town,
right?
Because as a school body, there's only so much we can do, and we're funded through town appropriation. So at the end of the day, this needs to get taken on as a priority by the towns. Mm-hmm. I've encouraged ours to again lean into this pilot program, but also get ahead of the curve a little bit and put something into this upcoming year's budget to start to figure this out. The bad actors aren't going to wait for us to get organized, and so to some extent, we do as individual towns and cities, I believe, have a responsibility to do something in regards to establishing a strategy. And it's great that Brian and the other folks on this call have kind of come forward and are trying to figure something out in advance of being asked by 36 of 39 districts. But that is what needs to happen, is that locally we need to organize and start to get in front of it and work with our state reps to hopefully have something coming down more from the top that can be funded and somewhat centralized or regionalized.
Well, that's why you're here. We're listening to you. This House Committee on Innovation, Internet and Technology hears you, and hopefully we can move forward. Rep Place, you had a question, I believe.
Well, I guess there's a question, but it's going to start off as a comment. As I'm sitting here listening to the conversation, there's two key laws, I guess, that keep popping in my head. The law of diminishing returns and the classic weapon versus armor conflict back and forth. Every time I'll use the M1 tank as an example. You started off in warfare with a guy with a rock and then a guy with a wooden shield. And then we've advanced all the way up to the point now where we've got M1 tanks versus other similar style tanks. And all of a sudden someone comes along with this little handheld carry thing, one little person that can take down this $75 million tank because we got so focused on one way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And my concern in terms of the idea that we're trying to develop a standard, not just within our state, but nationally, if we get too focused on one way, we're going to lose track. If we try to just focus on one thing, if we don't allow for innovation throughout the space, and then we allow ourselves to get focused on one track, we could fall behind in some way. And again, that comes back to the law of diminishing returns. I mean, there's only so much. A community like Providence has a lot more data to protect. There's a difference between, again, protecting the electorals, our election securities, and say the database for property values and things like that. And I'm not saying you gentlemen haven't taken this stuff into consideration, but if you could touch on those two, again, my concern being that with the law of diminishing returns, we're going to come up with this platform that just isn't needed in some of our communities, but at the same time, but again, we'll also come up with a platform that is going to be so narrowly tailored that someone's going to come up with this innovative way to blow it out of the water because, again, we just focused on one particular type of thing. So if you guys, I don't know if anyone wants to touch on that, or if I'm just going to sit here and pontificate for a little bit and just add
I
to the
think-
conversation. I mean, if someone wants to touch on it, that's fine. If not, again,
I think
it was
Brian
just something I
Tardif-
wanted to add to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep.
I can certainly attempt to address that. I love military analogies, by the way. So you make a very valid point, and it goes back to Dave's earlier comment about the Naval War College, right? So they obviously, based off of the criticality and sensitivity of their data, need to follow and mitigate a greater number of risks. They have national security interests at hand. To your point, the frameworks that we're recommending help the municipalities and school districts identify the threats and vulnerabilities that are, or the vulnerabilities that are specific to the threats to their operating environment. And that is determined by regular cyber intelligence that's received from MSISAC, the Election ISAC, the State Police, the National Guard, multiple national level entities that provide cyber intelligence. So again, the framework is there to really help you identify the risks specific to your environment. It's not really focused on the technology that you may use, because the technology is just a business enabler, but it helps you look at the processes and potentially the technology that you should be using to better protect your environment. This is where cyber insurance, this discussion is very interesting to me, because as we hear, cyber insurance is perceived as cybersecurity mitigation. It is not. It is really just insurance to protect you, or not even protect you, but to help you recover from when something bad happens. So the investment can either be made in preventing, or not either. It should be made in both. It should be made in preventing the cybersecurity events and incidents relevant to your particular environment, as well as the insurance to help you recover if something were to occur.
Excellent point. It's great conversation. Really so important to know the state's top cybersecurity risks, how our towns and our schools are mitigating those risks. And obviously, as Brian just points out, cyber insurance is not cybersecurity mitigation. And what are some of the best practices going into the 21st century? Are there any other questions from members of this committee? It has been a wonderfully robust, informative discussion. Rep. Courtran.
I am curious if our risk has increased in the school systems with the introduction of so much more online learning.
So I would add that, the comparison of Providence to Burrillville, although Providence has much more data and many more systems probably to protect, Burrillville has the same requirements in regards to what they have to report to the state about their students. So although their footprint may be a little smaller, they do need data systems that supply that data to the state for fewer students, but still the need is there.
And it's not just online learning, but where they're learning from. The perimeter of the school moved out to the home, and so those are individual establishments, and the cybersecurity risk expanded as soon as that Chromebook went home. And a number of attacks went up fivefold starting COVID. So it's just a huge amount of increased risk, starting in the COVID era in the school systems. And we watched all the different kinds of attacks go up dramatically. That's not to say we didn't do a pretty good job fighting it. We did a decent job. Otherwise they would have been unusable. So I don't want to paint a complete, doom and gloom that we didn't do anything. We do have a number of systems in place, firewall systems and web filtering systems and things like that helped fight, a lot of what happened, but the increase was dramatic.
Great question. Thank you. So you were sitting before a state house representatives, a group of people who listen, who frame policy, who write laws. In our final minutes, I'd like each of you to have 30, 60 seconds, tell us what is it that we need to do to make your job easier, to make our cities and towns and school districts safer. Who would like to start? I like these, kind of round robin.
I can go first.
Thank
Chairwoman.
you, Mr.
So,
Tardif.
I think, just to very briefly summarize, raise awareness of the challenge that the IT administrators are currently facing. Cybersecurity is not an IT issue, it's IT related. And we certainly need leadership buy-in to understand that commitment needs to be made to addressing the people, process, and technology surrounding building up a good programmatic cybersecurity program in the municipalities. Commonality of verbiage and regulations and policies would be fantastic. The NIST framework, if that can be inherited, that way the members of the Joint Cyber Task Force can better assist the municipalities and will understand the controls that should be in place and be able to help and steer cyber hygiene improvements at that level.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Tardif. Mr. Marble.
As somebody had said before, watch for the money. The money aspect of this should not be we can't gloss over that because sometimes, money becomes the real crux of what we can do. And I do believe that there are a number of tranches of dollars that are going to be coming in the near future that will not only combine things like broadband expansion and various digital technique infrastructure things, but will also address cybersecurity opportunities. And we should watch that. A lot of the rules aren't written. People are throwing around large dollars like $10 billion to Treasury and $7.2 billion to E-rate, but they haven't written the rules under which and the categories under which that will go. But what I understand going on down in Washington is cybersecurity will become part of that discussion. So I do believe that there's an opportunity here to watch the money side of this to see if there's an opportunity for us.
Thank you for that. And also, we hear you on the broadband issue. You'll be back, Dave, to talk more about ocean and broadband with a different topic. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Lieutenant Yelle?
Yes, I would like to go back to the C-suite or the administrators' buy-in. We need to get the buy-in from the top level to push it down and understand that the municipalities have a lack of resources, they have a lack of staff, they have a lack of money, they have a lack of training. I don't think a lot of them have done self-assessments. We need to push out some assessments so we could build that standardized approach. But I think one of the issues that towns have to look at is, I think a lot of times an IT department is an IT department. They're trying to build the network. They can build networks and they can connect your computer to the printer and to the scanner and to your home computer so you can tie in. But they're not built around security. Mm-hmm. So an IT department and a security department are two different silos. And so the IT department builds it, but there has to be a security element that just becomes inherent in that. And it's not always the same person. And I think a lot of these cash-strapped IT departments that have one or two people that are responsible for issuing out 1,800 Chromebooks, keeping them up to date, maintaining the printers when the principal's printer doesn't work or the superintendent's home computer is not tied into the network. They're handling all those tasks every day and they can't focus on security. So I think staffing and the focus on a security element is crucial to start building that base.
Thank you, Lieutenant. It's a good point. IT builds it, but cybersecurity protects it. Scott Gosling from the Rhode Island Department of Education. Lightning round, your 60 seconds on what our takeaway is from today's hearing.
I would piggyback on what Lieutenant Yelle had said and add training to the mix. So training the IT director both at the municipality level and school district level. Those folks are dedicated to making sure every student has access to online learning, as well as supporting parents. So any help that we can give them with regards to understanding the landscape out there. And I think folks are so intimidated because they think they're actually fighting nation states in this effort. So anything that we can do to get them up to speed with regards to what they need to do to protect their systems, I think that'll go a long way.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. And Clerk, I'd like to recognize Representatives Tabone and Courtfield. If we could please put them in for the attendance, that would be great. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and discussion. It's the first of many that this committee has to have. I agree with what all of the task force members of the Joint Security have said, that we need some policies, some plans, some training, and you have our assurances that we will start working towards that. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. This concludes the hearing this afternoon. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second? Thank you so much. I'm Deb Ruggiero. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Stay well.